Increment, not
Yeah,
refinement.
increment. Yeah,
Increment.
increment.
Increment, yeah. So there is a difference. Yeah, rightly said. Thank you. So there are differences. See, when you talk about product backlog, refinement, increment are two different concepts.
Okay,
So most of the people confuse us here. That's where I'm asking you this. In
I see.
refinement means the existing issues you are refining. Means high
Okay,
priority items will become low priority sometimes. Low priority items may become high priority sometimes.
okay,
Intermediary priority items may become low or high. So priorities may change. Why priorities are changing? Priorities are changing subject to the correction is priorities are changing based on the business decisions or the business policies what organization is taking for the short run benefits. It's not for the long term. Because see, for example, we never expected the COVID situation in the year of 2020, right? Across the world, people
yeah,
were suffered almost for 2 years, right? So the
yeah,
phase of the organizations, especially if you have, because I cannot name, sorry to say, I cannot name the examples and all that, but phase of the organizations, some people have changed their phase of the phase of work style and all everything very fast. They have taken action steps and all, and they have changed the way of working style and all everything, and they have adopted very fast. Change adoption has made very fast. But few organizations have taken a lot of time. Even still today, they were struggling a lot to make some changes out of it. So there are some changes which may happen in the business decisions, not just by intention, right? Sometimes due to compulsion also we have to make some changes. This is how generally business will be, right? So business is not something in anyone's hand, right? So due to the changes happens across world globally, there are some impacted areas which could impact on some lines of businesses. I don't say every business will get impacted. Some lines of businesses will get impacted. So whenever this is getting impacted, because see, because in economics, will for everywhere for everything there will be a connectivity. Even if you want to do a commodity prices increased because of the transportation, right? So because why transportation? Because there was no proper transportation, fuel charges were accepted. Why fuel charges? Maybe because of the different reasons across the world. So everything was interconnected here, right? So because in this interconnection there are a lot of businesses were roaming around. So whatever the changes they wants to make at all, they have to make the changes in regular intervals. So when they are making any kind of changes, based on those changes, whatever the priority items they are taking in the product backlog, as far as implementation, if there is anything of that sort I'm talking about, if there is an implementation is going on, automatically it will be implemented. It will be reflected on the implementation also. Clear everyone, right? This is where generally the difference you see from product backlog refinement to increment. Refinement is a refinement process of backlog. Increment nothing but you're adding some new increments into the existing thing, and wherein you are adding to the existing means you are adding some new requirements all the time. For example, nowadays now customer has given 10 requirements. Can you expect that 10 requirements will remain standstill all the time?
not
Right? You cannot expect. For example, out of 10 requirements, 3 were completed, 7 were balanced. Meanwhile, few more requirements, few more 5 or 6 requirements were added to the existing ones, which became 13 and 14 or 12. Right? So there is a constant increment of requirements which will be comes and added to the repository. This is where generally you call it as product backlog increment. Refinement means priorities will change. Increment means new requirements will come and changing. New requirements will come and add into the product backlog. Where again refinement will be taken care of. Where high priority items will go on top. Where low priorities will go on next. That's the reason why there is a technique which normally we follow, which is called Moscow technique. I'm just writing here. If you guys want, you can write a note of it. So prioritization technique will follow. Prioritization technique. I think it is visible to everyone, right? This notes is visible. Is it visible for everyone?
for me at least. It is
Is this
very small. I think I'm not able to see.
is it very small? Can't you
Yeah, for
see properly?
it is.
Okay, let me use Word document then. I'll write on that. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll use the Word document to write. That's better. This is where generally prioritization comes into picture. Prioritization techniques, we call it as prioritization techniques. So this prioritization technique, which is called Moscow technique, the name itself is that. Right? So this is what generally the technique we follow. So in this Moscow technique, these prioritizations will be categorized into four different parts: must, should, could, and wouldn't have or wouldn't have. Right? So that's what.
I thought that Moscow city.
No, no, no. It's not Moscow City. It's not Moscow City. It's called as the name itself. We called as
Understood,
Moscow.
understood.
M O is normally these are small numbers. Actually, this is how it is. M O is small letter. M is O.
Okay,
This is how it is. This is how it. Yeah. So
okay,
this is the right way to write. It's because O's are not capital letters in reference to Moscow
okay,
technique. MOS COW Moscow we call it as means must, should, could, and wouldn't have or wouldn't. That's what we call it. Must means requirements which are essentially important for us to perform in application development. In development, right? So this is what we call it as. Yeah, this is what we call it as must. Requirements which are essentially important for us to perform is what we call it as must. Second, should. Requirements which are necessary. Those are important, essentially important. These are necessary items. Necessary items. Which are necessary items. This is what should. Could means which provide a value added to the project. But these are not mandatory. These are not mandatory. Could means these are not mandatory. This is not mandatory for this application. But if you are adding these requirements and all, it elevates the performance of the system. Either I can tell you the user experiences, right? So user interfaces, user experiences, the kind of grandeur of the application you see, right? So these are all the add-ons to you because essentially those are all not much essential for all the applications. For example, for business related commercial applications, you may require this granularness, user interfaces, that richness and all everything is required. But whereas when you use business applications and which are used for internal purposes, you don't require granularness, all that. More than that, we require security, right? Security of the application, easiness of usage. Easiness of usage is what is important because a lot of stakeholders are involving in working on it. So they may be required regular things on that, right? So when you talk about could are not mandatory, but if you it will provide you value added services if you are adding to the existing ones. This is what we call it as could. Next is wouldn't means these are not important as of now, may require in future, right? So these requirements wouldn't have means as of now it is not needed. These may be required in future. This is how generally these prioritizations will be taking place. So these prioritizations, whatever the prioritizations I was mentioned here, these prioritizations may not be standstill all the time. Okay, please underline this point. So whatever that I said, right? For example, whatever are the must will not be must all the time. Maybe there may be some fixed requirements which are must. But whatever I say is must now may not be my high priority, maybe after the next sprint, right? Once maybe after 2 3 weeks or so, maybe my business priorities might be changed slightly because business priorities never changes, because we don't change that easily. But short-term benefits, for the benefit of short-term benefits, there are some priorities here or there will be taken by the organizations, right? So due to the different market business conditions and all, we do that. Right? So whatever the high priority item, as of now, whatever I'm expecting may not be my high priority item after 2 3 weeks. So there is a constant need of increments to the products, issues, tasks, and all everything to the added to the existing product backlog. But these increments will be prioritized from time to time. This is where generally product backlog refinement as well as increments will be taken place, right? So this is what generally product backlog stands for. After product backlog, next call it sprint. We call it as what is sprint? Sprint is nothing but collection of user stories. Collection of the user stories is called sprint. So there are some terminologies, especially when we are working on Azure DevOps, of course, which is something connecting to Agile, because Azure DevOps, even in Agile environment, Azure DevOps tool can be used, because now and then almost all the processes people are working on Agile environment. So Agile and Azure DevOps has a connect. Okay, in some time I'll show the Jira board also, so that you'll be understood well how it is connected, all that. Now there are some terminologies we need to know: backlog, what is sprint, what is task, right? So what is meant by a board, right? So all these things you must be knowing. So there are some jargons and terminologies one must be knowing as follows. The first one we call it as backlog. What is backlog? Backlog nothing but it's a repository to store all the issues. All the issues. This is what generally we call it as backlog stands for. Issue can be anything. Okay, issue can be a user story, issue can be a task, issue can be a subtask, right? Issue can be a user story, issue can be a task, issue can be a subtask even. Issue can be a bug even. Sometimes bug means whatever the functionality was completed, if there is any testing happens, whatever the corrections is required, so those we call it as bugs. Identifications were we called as bugs. So even bugs also can be considered here, right? So repository to store all the issues is called backlog. Point number one. Next, what is sprint then? Sprint nothing but collection of user stories. Whatever the user stories are we writing, the collection of user stories and all everything will be called as sprint, right? So backlog followed by sprint, right? So sprint collection, sprints and all everything. Next, what is meant by board? Board is a report. Board is 1 minute. Let me open it. Yeah, board is to show you the action items. What is that we have taken so far? Okay, board is nothing but board will be used to show the action items. What are the action items we have taken, and what will be the status of each and every item? Means which work is completed so far, which is under the progress, which is under the done state. Normally status will be considered on a high level note in three parts. One is to do, in progress, and done. Usually we call it as to do means whichever is not started so far, which we are about to do. Second, in progress. In progress means which is under the progress. Done means which is already completed, right? So this is how generally the categorization will be made: backlog, sprint, board, right? So this is how generally the categorization will be more made here, right? So this is what it is. So at the same time, test plans and all, of course, test plans and all everything that I'll be explaining later, how to create test plans, all that, because different test plans, test scripts, test reports and all everything will be prepared for the project. So for that, I'll take some project case study. On that case study, I will create a project and I'll show you, so that you will be understood much better, right guys? Right, so this is what it is. So this is what generally these boards and all everything is being used for. So these are the overall, and this is an overall understanding about Azure DevOps, followed by the kind of artifacts, whatever the artifacts we have in all everything. Because in artifacts, like especially in reference to the Jira and all, Jira and Agile and all, it's everything itself is concerned. There are artifacts, something like daily Scrum, right? Sprint review, retrospections. All these things comes under artifacts. Usually, when you're talking about Agile artifacts, I'm talking about Scrum artifacts or something like if you follow Scrum artifacts, right? So there is a difference, fundamental difference between Azure artifacts to Scrum artifacts. When you talk about Scrum artifacts and all, these Scrum artifacts were nothing but sprint planning, daily Scrum, next sprint review, next retrospection, right? So these are the different items will be there under Scrum artifacts. Sprint planning, daily Scrum review, retrospection. Sprint planning means whatever the sprint you are about to develop comes under sprint planning. Daily Scrum means whatever the regular activities, regular day-to-day activities among the team are discussing, right? What we have done so far, what is that we have supposed to work. To know about generally everything, daily Scrum is being used. Next, review means whatever we have done so far, right? So whatever the progress was completed so far, and what is the progress we are about to work. That's all comes under sprint review. When you talk about retrospection means once the sprint is completed, how value the sprint was done by us. Is there any kind of faults and mistakes was done by us or not? So how best and what best we can do for the next sprint to retrospect that. Generally, this sprint retrospection is being used. So these are something like which is called Scrum artifacts or Agile related artifacts, which are something essentially important. The same way, if you want to have some Azure artifacts and all everything, these Azure artifacts are something essentially connecting with the DevOps environment because DevOps has different streams as because there are lot of integrations which will be taking place into that. So wherein we need to connect to the feeds and wherein we need to identify the artifacts, whichever is essentially important to understand with. Right. So this is what the overall understanding about Azure DevOps. Right. So for what reason Azure DevOps is being used and for what purposes we are going for Azure DevOps. So this is what generally it is all about.